Now BBC Two Rajan Datta introduces tonight's edition of East.
Tibetan Buddhists espouse peace, harmony and compassion. But now a faction based in Britain say they've been cast out by the Dalai Lama for worshipping a banned deity. Tonight on East, why the Battle of the Buddhists has caused an unholy row. The 14th Dalai Lama, spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhists and head of their government in exile, has won the respect of most world leaders for his stand against the Chinese communists who took control of his Himalayan homeland in 1950. He and thousands of his followers fled to Dharamsala in northern India when the conquering Chinese began destroying Buddhist monasteries, brutalizing and killing monks in an attempt to suppress their religion. In the West, the Dalai Lama's stand against Chinese oppression and human rights violations has earned him the Nobel Peace Prize, as well as the support and admiration of world leaders. The campaign for a free Tibet has struck a chord with everyone from rap artists staging sellout concerts to top Hollywood actors and directors.
The Buddha of compassion, the wish-fulfilling jewel, the 14th Dalai Lama.
Kundan, the latest offering from director Martin Scorsese, charts the extraordinary life of the man groomed from the age of 6 to be Dalai Lama and religious leader of his people. But beneath the gloss of Hollywood, his reputation is increasingly coming under attack.
Today, the Dalai Lama's authority and spiritual leadership is being challenged, not only by the Chinese in Beijing, but by Buddhists here in Britain. Behind me lies the headquarters of one of Britain's fastest growing Buddhist sects, the new Kadampa tradition.
Conishead Priory is a vast Gothic mansion set in Britain's Lake District. It provides an impressive retreat for the ever-growing number of Westerners drawn to Tibetan Buddhism. It also serves as the headquarters of the new Kadampa tradition, or NKT, a branch of the religion that is proving particularly attractive to Western followers. What sets this centre apart from most other Buddhist centres in the United Kingdom is the complete absence of pictures or teachings of the Dalai Lama. That's because the NKT, led by a reclusive Tibetan monk, Kelsang Gyatso, say they've been shunned by the Dalai Lama for refusing to stop their practice of worshipping a fearsome-looking deity known as Dorje Shugden.
It's a practice which, according to the Dalai Lama, is harmful to the Tibetan cause, a danger to his own life, and creates sectarianism amongst Tibetan Buddhists.
Followers of the NKT in the 100 or so centres in this country believe Dorje Shugden to be a Buddha who protects their Gelugpa school, one of 4 main schools of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama, himself from the Gelugpa school, first warned Buddhists 20 years ago about the dangers of worshipping Shugden. But it wasn't until 2 years ago that he formally warned his followers to stop the practice.
Unfortunately, I myself, in early 50, I also used to follow to worship the spirit due to ignorance. Then eventually I gained more knowledge. So therefore, this is one of my reasons. The worship spirit, the Shugden spirit, is so controversial. And 15th Dalai Lama and many used to consider as an evil spirit. Now worship such things is really the indication of degenerate of Buddha Dharma.
The Dalai Lama's action has enraged the NKT leader, Kelsang Gyatso. He believes a ban has been imposed on Shugden followers and that the Dalai Lama wants to destroy Tibetan Buddhist traditions that have been passed down hundreds of years.
You wrote many letters. Okay, you said this. Can you tell us very clearly how Dorje Shugden practice harm Tibetan independence, your life, and Buddhism? We sent many letters directly him. Nothing clear answer. Now Western people realize he lied.
Members of the NKT in Britain feel so angry about the Dalai Lama's stand that they've started taking non-violent direct action. Under the banner of the Shugden Supporters Coalition, demonstrations have been staged accusing the Nobel Peace Prize winner of violating human rights and religious freedom. NKT protesters now picket the Dalai Lama whenever he sets foot outside India. The conflict over Dorje Shugden has highlighted a darker side to Tibetan Buddhism, marked by bitter infighting between different traditions. Stephen Batchelor is a former Gelugpa monk and author on Buddhist issues.
On the one hand, you have the Dalai Lama, who, by virtue of his role, represents all the Tibetan traditions of Buddhism, of which there are 4, and sees himself really as someone who holds the community together. It's crucial that he create as much harmony between the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism as possible. The followers of Dorje Shugden are members of one of the 4 main traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, but they hold a much more traditional view of what kind of teachings are central and most authoritative in defining Buddhism in Tibet. So consequently, when the Dalai Lama begins to embrace teachings of other schools, particularly the Nyingmapa, this does not sit well with the traditionalists or the purists who feel that this is somehow a betrayal of the purity of their traditional order.
Completely perfect Buddha.
The NKT have compared the actions of the Dalai Lama over Dorje Shugden to the Pope deciding one day that he'd like to ban Catholics from worshipping the Virgin Mary.
And offer gifts, so please bless us.
But other Gelugpa practitioners in Britain, like Geshe Tashi of the Jamyang Centre in London, say the Dalai Lama is not seeking to bully all Buddhists into his way of thinking.
I never ever get a feeling he is sort of, pushing us to go through his way. He always giving the information what's happening, but final decision is always he left to oneself. Not only for the Westerner as well as for the Tibetan.
Steve Booth, also known as Kenrab, is a leading disciple of Kelsang Gyatso. He's based at Pocklington Hall, an NKT centre in Yorkshire.
Within the Tibetan community, there's been a tremendous amount of persecution and suffering experienced by Dorje Shugden practitioners. We are free to practice in the West, of course, but we feel strong bond with our spiritual brothers and sisters in the Tibetan community, so we are trying on their behalf, out of compassion, to overturn this ban.
May no one ever be separated from their happiness. May everyone have equanimity, free from hatred and attachment.
So the Dalai Lama said, no, this is wrong. So then we have to say, please give religious freedom. Only this. We are nothing against him.
May everyone be happy.
One of them was letters, they mentioned religious freedom. This is not question of religious, religious practice. This is question of the spirit worship.
NKT followers and the Shugden Supporters Coalition have even taken to the internet to attack the Dalai Lama. They accuse him of being responsible for what they say are more than 300 cases of human rights abuses arising from the feud within Buddhism.
It's very difficult for people to practice at all. They are ostracized, they're vilified, they lose their jobs, they are driven out of their community. There have been people driven out of their homes, people have been stabbed, and many violent things have been happening within that community.
Shugden literature even accuses the Dalai Lama of instigating what they term a hit list of people he'd like to see eliminated. Although the claim is strongly denied by the Dalai Lama, top of the list is Kelsang Gyatso.
Everybody appreciate because Dalai Lama is so high. I am so appreciate. I have nothing in my life this. But I am better not die early because I need people to have some hope, some progress, to solve this problem.
Strong allegations indeed. If true, they pose a serious threat, not only to the personal reputation of the Dalai Lama himself, but also to the campaign for a free Tibet. We put these accusations to Tibet House, official representatives of the Dalai Lama here in the UK.
I think basically that they are doing a smear campaign against His Holiness and the Tibetan government in exile, which is most unfortunate. I think if we want to resolve any issue, that's not the way to go forward.
The town of Dharamsala, over the last 40 years, has been transformed into a mini Tibet. Today it's home to more than 100,000 Tibetans living in exile. Allegations that they're suffering as a result of the pronouncement on Dorje Shugden are strongly denied by the Dalai Lama.
It is my responsibility to make it clear what's right, what's wrong, and what is the consequences. But whether the people listen or not, my word, it is up to individual. Right from the beginning, my position like that. But the people's response, very, very very good. People's response, very good. So now is a Tibetan community in India, now no longer any sort of problem. A few individuals, they are making some publication or some noise, making noising. That's all right. That's always happened.
Amnesty International also dismissed claims that the Dalai Lama is abusing human rights. They're more concerned about the row between Buddhists, diverting attention from human rights abuses by the Chinese in Tibet. So too are the Tibetan government in exile.
I've been in this country for the last 9 years. I, for one, have not seen any member of the NKT or its leaders or spiritual teachers or lamas taking part in any demonstration outside the Chinese embassy or issuing any statements calling for Tibetan independence or leave alone for human rights.
Publicly, the NKT say they fully support efforts to free Tibet, but they're skeptical of the efforts made in this direction by the Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama's intention in that respect is noble, but his actual ability to return to Tibet has failed. It's a complete failure. The Tibetans are a long way from returning back to Tibet. The Chinese government hasn't spoken to the Dalai Lama for almost 10 years.
There are now signs that the war of words between Buddhists may be turning into a real war. Last year, 3 monks living close to the Dalai Lama's residence were brutally murdered.
According to the local Indian police, the 3 murders just behind my house, that involved by those followers of the Shugden.
Indian police also suspect that the Chinese are harbouring the killers, leading to allegations that the Chinese are using the Shugden issue to further undermine the reputation of the Dalai Lama.
Some Chinese publication in local Chinese authorities in Tibet, in the part of their re-education in various monasteries and nunnery in Tibet. Now also you see using this material. Nowadays, some of these books, you see, stated, now Dalai Lama completely isolated the whole Tibetan community in India. Now, they resented Dalai Lama.
Kelsang Gyatso's confrontation with the Dalai Lama has seen him expelled from the Indian monastery where he trained before coming to Britain. But this hasn't dented his popularity amongst Western converts to Buddhism. Through a policy of rapid expansion, Kelsang Gyatso's following has risen dramatically over the last 6 years. Some 3,000 members now owe allegiance to him and the NKT. The organization has successfully tapped into Westerners' insatiable appetite for Buddhism. This is reflected in the accounts of 18 NKT centres supplied to the Charities Commission. They showed earnings last year close to £1 million. Suburban houses like the Akshobhya Centre in Nottingham are usually the first point of contact for Westerners wanting to take up simple Buddhist practices.
Flourish forevermore. The ground sprinkled with perfume and spread with flowers. The great mountain full and sun and moon. Seen as the Buddha.
When the membership grows, the emphasis is placed on finding a larger centre.
Enjoy such pure lands. I offer.
This is typified by the grand setting of centres like the Madhyamaka, a Georgian mansion on the outskirts of York, and the Tara Centre at Ash Hall in Derbyshire. The success of Buddhism in the West is largely due to its image. It's a religion that is said to be open to discussion and interpretation. In the words of Buddha, you must question everything.
I mean, generally speaking, Buddhism is a very, very open religion. You know, it's totally up to you. Totally up to you whether you're going to accept or not. You have it, you know, whether you agree or not. You can argue, you can ask questions.
However, the NKT rely almost exclusively on the teachings of Kelsang Gyatso to the exclusion of other teachers. This has led to allegations by ex-members of religious intolerance and fanaticism.
When you have a group like the NKT who have broken away from mainstream Tibetan Buddhism, then clearly all the authority comes to rest on one person. You have a somewhat aggressive organization that deeply believes in the value of what it's doing. If you question the authorities, that doesn't go down well. You're expected to conform. There are amazing promises given to you if you do follow the path as they teach it. So consequently, it does lead to a rather fanatic mentality.
Steve was an NKT member. Like many Westerners, his fascination with Buddhism led him to his local group. However, things turned sour when the NKT took control.
In the early days, the whole Buddhist group was a very gentle group. With time, things did start to change. The example of the bookshop that we had, where initially we were allowed to sell books from all manner of Buddhist traditions, and then we were told that we can't do that. The whole setup changed. It wasn't so free and easy. It became more of a Geshe sort of cult group. I think all of the original members left the whole NKT centre within a year or two of it opening.
I don't want to show I am special, Tibetan special, Geshe Lama, just humble. I try to remain just humble.
If you were to sort of say, well, is Geshe Kelsang really a Buddha? Then the shock horror waves that would cause are quite immense, because to NKT practitioners, Geshe is indeed a Buddha, an enlightened being.
People who are thinking Geshe Kelsang Tantric Buddha is not bad. That's that from their recognition, you know. Maybe they seem like this because they're pure mind, you know. Because they're happy with me, and there is some beneficial from spiritual, you know. So maybe they think, oh, maybe he Buddha. That is nothing wrong, you know.
East found several disillusioned former members of the NKT who were unwilling to appear on camera. This letter, addressed to Kelsang Gyatso by one, raised a number of disturbing issues concerning practices of the NKT. Gyatso's reply warned of legal action if the former member published his concerns. One former resident of the Manjushri Centre who did agree to speak to us is Ondi. She, with her family, lived happily at the centre for 13 years. But she says the atmosphere changed when Kelsang Gyatso arrived.
The place was changing. Very slowly, very gradually, things would be altered. One of the final things which upset me, I think, was when the library was changed and books written by everybody else were slung out. And the only books that you could read there were Geshe Kelsang's.
Following an internal dispute with another teacher, Kelsang Gyatso took control over the Manjushri Center. This was when Ondi knew it was time to move out.
Geshe Kelsang was gradually trying to remove all people from the place who didn't have him as a teacher, totally. We had other teachers. We very much respected Geshe Kelsang's teachings and got a lot from them, but we also had other teachers and other loyalties.
Despite this, the family was still keen to keep in close contact with friends who had decided to stay at the centre, but this soon became impossible.
About 2 years ago, a letter was posted through our letterbox late one night, and it banned the whole of our family from ever going there again or any other NKT centre because it said we were critical. And for me that was a key aspect of the problems at Manjushri Institute, because people were discouraged from saying anything which might be in opposition to what Geshe Kelsang said.
Not true. Never happened these things. Never. I'd like to know who are these. Never happened. During teaching, that no one giving too many questions. I would like more questions. I will give answer, of course, you know, that make clearly, you know. It doesn't make any sense. It's not true, though.
Concerns have also been raised about the teacher training programs that are a central facet of the NKT. The programs can last for a number of years, and students are trained to memorize the texts of Kelsang Gyatso. Aviorth spent part of his 4 years with the NKT training to be a teacher.
The whole climate of teachers training program was, you know, we were the, if you like, the shock troops, the elite of the NKT, and really the attitude was that we should simply take on the teachings from Geshe Kelsang, that we should just become almost like parrots of these teachings, that, you know, these were the teachings of a pure Buddha, the third Buddha of this age, as they refer to him.
People have choice. Definitely, 100%. There is no any rule. People cannot read other books. No one, if you find any single person, Geshe Kelsang said, you cannot read other books, I will give you £1 million, you know. Yeah, you can. Just rumor, you know. We not pay other book in our library because it is not public library. It is for students who are a program joined.
There is a sort of rubber stamp group like at Manjushri Center, but all the decisions are implemented by Kelsang Gyatso. Everything is referred to him for a decision, and then the committees will stamp it.
The truth is, there are some people who feel they have been forced to leave here, and they're unhappy about that.
Of course, because if they wanted to stay here, they should do correctly, you know. They're not causing problem, you know. They should keep this belief.
I was met in the corridor and had one of the famous warnings, verbal warnings from one of the managers, told that, you know, I'd been reported as making certain comments and raising certain points, and really if I continued with this, you know, like it would be inappropriate for me to remain at the centre. When I came back from my mother's funeral, I was given a letter of expulsion from the centre.
And he leads them.
The Spring Festival is one of only a few opportunities for large numbers of NKT members from all over the world to receive teachings directly from Kelsang Gyatso. It's also used as an opportunity to give what are called Tantric Empowerments. Although a common practice in Tibetan Buddhism, some experts have warned against taking these too early.
The danger is that one makes a lifelong commitment to a particular teacher, to a particular practice, and if then a few years down the road you begin to have second thoughts about this, you begin to say, well, wait a minute, maybe this is not really appropriate for me, you're already bound by ties of commitment which were taken in utter earnestness and seriousness, which become very difficult to disentangle oneself from.
The goddess of light and the goddess of
I was very unsure about whether I should take these empowerments. So, well, Geshe Kelsang had said it was okay, so I did it. And went away for on the retreat, took the Tantric Empowerments, along with several hundred other people, some of whom, I will say, were so new to Buddhism that they didn't have an idea what was going on at all. They were just told, this is Buddhism, this is what you do.
There's no way to take any Tantric empowerment. Tantric practices is advanced practice.
Please bestow your blessings on all sentient beings, pervading space.
You're told that when you take an empowerment, that if you go against this empowerment, if you betray it, then you will go to, there's a special hell realm in Buddhist belief dedicated for people who break their tantric vows and commitments. And people believe that if they go against their guru, their teacher, they will suffer for innumerable aeons, the most horrendous tortures.
One more problem that people have said is that sometimes if they come here just to find out about Buddhism generally, very quickly they are being asked to take Tantric empowerment, to take vows, ordination, too quickly.
Their choice, you know. Yeah, I understand it's something people too quick, you know. But when people say, I want to take initiation, I can't say no, you know.
While for some the actions of the NKT seem un-Buddhist, for others they've successfully filled a spiritual void that many Westerners crave. This can be seen from the number of people that continue to flock to their centres.
What I'm trying is that Buddha's teaching to integrate Western way of life, day by day life, and help to solve human problem.
Today, in his Himalayan home, the Dalai Lama, as the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, looks to lead his exiled community into the 21st century. But the feud with the followers of Dorje Shugden is an unwelcome diversion. It's beginning to tarnish not only his reputation, but that of Buddhism as a whole. Once upon a time, this sort of dispute would have been settled behind closed doors in a monastery.
There was more interest and more investigation. That's good. If you see these things remain, hidden, it is more dangerous. Now it become public. It become open. I think very good.
So it really is time, I think, to stop idealizing Tibetans, to stop idealizing any Asian form of Buddhism, and really to begin to look for what are the guiding principles that the Buddha laid down, that subsequent generations of teachers from all traditions have continually reaffirmed, and how do we actually live those values, not in a Tibetan monastery, but in the world we live in today.
Now in the West, among these foreigners, new Buddhist, again now is due to lack of knowledge, awareness, is in this initial problems will happen. Now time goes, more research work, more study, it will go. This is nothing to do with religion or Buddhist faith, or Buddhist tradition. This is just one very controversial or negative spirit worship.
Just tell Brigadier Left.